9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Every 9 seconds, 1 in 3 women and 1 in 3 men is being victimized in the U.S. My name is Claudette McKenzie, and I am a domestic violence survivor. Welcome to my channel, 9 Seconds. Hello everyone, welcome back to 9 Seconds. My name is Claudette McKenzie. This week I have with me from right is Ben, Jody, Delwyn, and Alan. And this week we are going to talk about a topic where most people, they don't want to talk about it. They only talk about it behind doors. And it's about men who are being victim of domestic violence. Sometimes when a man is being abused, they are so ashamed to tell anyone, so they keep it on the hush-hush. So I'm going to try and get my peers' perspective on what they think. First question. Do you believe that men are socialized not to express their feelings and see themselves as victims?
My name's Delwyn. I think that when we're raised by mother, father, or whoever in the home, traditionally, you have, the man, or as a boy, you're raised as, to play with boy toys, and they just raise you, to do certain things that are acceptable for a man, as you grow older, and they do certain things that are acceptable for a girl. So like, it's pretty much ingrained in everybody's culture, at the beginning. I mean, what happens after that is, pretty much, life circumstances, which takes you a certain route. So I think that, it's not in the nature of a man to complain about being abused or just complain about anything in general, So coming forward, talking about you've been abused by, your spouse or your girlfriend, it just doesn't, it's not something a man would do.
Hey guys, my name is Alan. My perspective on this is, I personally believe that it depends on the individual as to how they respond to abuse. Coming from me, like, once I know what good and bad is, I do what I feel like I need to do based off me, not what nobody else does, So when it comes to like abuse like that.
Hi, my name is Jody, and I think men decide not to voice their opinions and thoughts on those things because you're taught, like Delwyn said, at a young age that, men are supposed to be masculine. But all those traits from masculinity and feminine traits are all taught behaviors. Those are all passed down behaviors. Boys play with Tonka trucks, boys shake hands, boys don't give hugs. Those are all taught behaviors. And naturally, if you're taught to be tough, things that are weak, you keep to yourself. Like if you're taught to tell the truth, when you lie, you keep that to yourself. Anything that's negative, that's seen negative by society, you try to keep it to yourself. And that's why I think men that are abused are men that have abusive spouses or partners, they keep it to themselves because they know that it's looked down upon. Even though getting abused is looked down upon as well, voicing is even worse because now that not only are you weak for getting, abused, but you're also weak for voicing it. So it's better to just keep it closed in the closet and not express it. And I think that's why a lot of men keep those thoughts and those actions that take place in the household to themselves.
I think that what Jody said was great. My name is Ben, by the way. That basically summed it up. Men are often stigmatized to stay strong and be tough, don't really show any emotion. Other than that, I know that a lot of people who I know have the idea that men are supposed to fix things. So what a lot of men do is they try and keep it to themselves until they can try and work it out themselves amongst them and their partner.
So do you guys believe that there are less resources out there for men? Have you guys ever heard of any resources that if it happens to you guys or anyone that they could go to? I know there are a lot of resources for women, but have you ever heard of anything for men?
The same resources that are offered to women, I believe, are offered to men. It's just the fact that, how we see ourselves, how society sees ourselves. I mean, it's just not something that a man is going to do per se or use. A man likes to think he has things under control. No matter where you from, you heard the old stereotype of, a man doesn't want to ask directions when he, clearly knows his loss or whatever. that, may not wholly be true, but that is a similar thing. Like, yeah, there's resources out there, but we feel like, we solve it our way, we're good.
And which way, Delwyn, if you don't mind me asking you, how would you solve that? If just, God forbid, it should happen, how would you go about it?
Okay, so before coming to Columbus State, I was in the Army 11 years. So the thing with the Army and the military is they're big on domestic violence. Like, that's not something that you play around with. So a soldier can easily ruin his career. And I've been in a couple situations where things started getting out of hand, where, throwing stuff, just unnormal stuff that's unhealthy past, yelling at each other, where I knew in my head, if I don't do something first, because like Georgia, whoever gets to the phone first and calls the police, that's the person that the police are going to believe, and that's the one they're going to take care of. So you don't want to be on the wrong end as a military person of that phone call. So, when it comes to something like that, like me personally, like I'm always thinking that, I need to preserve my career. I mean, you get out the Army with a dishonorable discharge. Nobody wants to hire you, and it's just, life is difficult. It's the same as going to prison. Just about things that people don't understand is a man having a domestic violence charge, whether you did anything or not. Like, it's just a bad stigma. So for me, it was an easy decision. I'm going to be the one, to go ahead and call the police first, because I was taking care of the family. So it's like, I'm not going to put my career in jeopardy for somebody who can't control themselves, and they know the same things I know. So for me, it's easy. But I think with men who aren't in a situation where, they could lose their career, their jobs because of it, lots of times, like in the civilian world, you can kind of keep some of that stuff to yourself, especially if you're not really high up on the totem pole as far as being a manager or supervisor, something like that. As long as it doesn't affect your work, nothing's really going to happen to you. But being in the position I was in, I had to be smarter than that. I couldn't really think about, pride or anything like that. No, it was getting messy, and to save myself and save my career, I had to be the one to make the phone call and be like, yo, my significant other's out of control, and I can't calm them down. So, I need somebody to come to the house and get them. And I mean, it worked out for me, but a lot of people, they still don't do it. People in the military, some people still don't do it, and they wind up ruining their careers or making it hard for themselves for the next 2-3 years, because that's a felony, So from my perspective, it's not a hard decision anymore, when it comes to have a career and have a good life versus, fighting with somebody who's trying to hurt you. It's an easy decision.
Well, usually when it, comes to like abuse and you being the victim, usually with males, if you're a victim of abuse in a relationship, it's a homosexual relationship, right? And so I've never been a victim of, and if it were to happen like that, I put myself in that situation, I would fight back. Like, so that would happen. And I would never be an abuser. I mean, I grew up in a house where there was abuse, but I'm my own person, So I looked, I'm like, that's not right. It didn't make me want to abuse somebody. I would never put my hands on a woman.
So I want to disagree with Delwyn a little bit. I do think there are resources for men, but not as many. I don't think they're as acceptable. For example, when I work, I volunteered at 2 domestic facilities in Atlanta, and when you walked into the facilities, they were catered directly to women. The pictures on the wall were softer pictures catered to women. The colors in the room were softer pictures catered to a woman's a woman that's a victim. Men that would come in there, we did have a few men come in, they were kind of looked down upon. They weren't treated with the same respect. You can tell when they walked in, it was kind of mumbling, like, what is he doing here? And it was already in the atmosphere that he was the one that was abusing somebody. So men didn't have the same type of, like, they had a stigma when they came in there, as if either they were the ones that were abusing or they're extremely weak because they were coming to get help for that for domestic abuse. So I do think the resources there are some resources out there, but I do think that the way society is set up with masculinity, as we stated before, when it comes down to being a victim, it's geared towards women. And everybody's putting in resources to help women. And men, there's resources out there, but if you're not in the right city and if you're not there at the right time, you don't get the access to them as much as women are able to.
I agree with what Jody says again. He basically summed it up really good. There are not as many resources for it for men, not just amongst men who stigmatize each other to want to be strong, but it's women as well. We see each other in some weird way that men are stronger, that men are better, but in the end, we are really all the same people who have the same needs, so we should treat each other equally, no matter who is the victim.
So, Jody, I'm gonna gear these questions towards you. Like, I feel like sometimes men don't report domestic violence because they're in a gay relationship and they feel like that one of the partner might be, like under the table. They don't want to come out. So, how do you feel like stuff like that since you're openly gay?
Yeah, so I am openly gay, and
No, I said it wrong.
No, you said it right. You good? I mean, it's just. I think that's a really big thing, and I'm going to speak specifically on the Black gay community. That a lot of relationships have a partner that is out and another partner that is not out of the closet. That is his sexuality remains under the table, and if there is abusive relationships in those type of settings, oftentimes people don't want to voice it, not just because they're men, but also because you don't want to draw attention to your partner that's not out. And, that's a lot of pressure for a lot of people to come out of the closet. That's a lot of pressure, which oftentimes in a relationship can lead to violence. So, when you have with somebody like myself that's out and I'm trying to get Ben's not gay, by the way, but I'm trying to get Ben to come out, it could be a lot of pressure in the relationship on Ben's side because he's like, I don't want to come out. And sometimes pressure can lead to violence. And, those things explode and get larger and just come to massive problems. And oftentimes, I'm sure all of us know, domestic violence, once that door is open, it's really, really hard to close it, whether it's in a straight relationship or a gay relationship. So, yeah.
All right. I was talking to the director at Hope Harbor, and I asked her because I'm very interested to know what are out there for men, because men are victim too, since everyone is always talking about female. I'm a female who's been victimized, but I also care about the men. I have 2 boys, and I don't want them to be victims of this as well. So as I was talking to her, she said that I asked, so is there anything for men? And she said, yes, we do have something. We put them in a hotel. And my first thought was, I remember being a victim and the military had put me in a hotel and I became crazy. Like I wanted to hurt myself because I felt more isolated. So I'm wondering, what are you guys' take on putting the men in a hotel, separating them from the women that's in the shelter? Or do you think, like, since there's so many women shelter here, they should have like a special place for the men too as well, instead of putting them in a hotel?
Gotcha. Well, I totally think that, men should have a shelter of their own, just because I think it is appropriate to have men and women separated when dealing with these type of situations, because we respond to them differently. Men need different resources than, women do when dealing with situations like this. But I can totally understand how that could be very, very intimidating. When you're getting removed from your home due to a dramatic cause like that, and you're being isolated into a hotel room. That's very, very, that's very, very, I would consider that to be out of the norm. That you're becoming very isolated. And the last thing you want once dealing with a situation like that is to be isolated, whether gay, straight, man, or woman. So I think that's very, I can't think off the top of my head a better way to go about doing that, but isolation doesn't seem like a great way to handle that.
I believe that, I believe that, there can be men's shelters for abuse, but I still think that it's really hard for a man, whether they're straight or gay, to come forward, because no matter what your preference is, you're still a man. Like, you've still been trained, or you've witnessed the societal norms, and you know what is expected of you, and that's just not something that somebody's going to. Now, regular shelters, there's plenty of shelters for just men and just women, so men can always go somewhere to stay, to get away from whatever physical or emotional abuse that they're suffering. I think there's a lot of options. It doesn't necessarily have to be specifically, oh, he's being abused, so we need a shelter for abused men, because like I said, men don't really want you to know that, because something like that is seen as weak, and not just men look at it like that. We're not like, we like to think about ourselves as not, having any double standards, and, people like to think of themselves as worldly, but there are some ingrained, built in double standards that, as open minded as we like to be, like, when you actually face with that situation or faced with thinking about it, you just, for some reason, you can't wrap your mind around it and think of it another way. Like, openly, I didn't want to get in trouble, by the Army. I wanted my job, but if it wasn't that, I probably would have still been there arguing and, doing what normal people do. So I just have a different outlook because I needed to have a different outlook to, make it through my career, so it's not something that I worry about, but other people, it's a little bit harder for them to do stuff like that. So there are resources for men. I just think that the subtle resources are something that men are more likely to use. That, the big sign outside the door saying for abused men, abused men are not going to come there. They're going to go. They're more likely to, they'll move in with a friend, or go find them a little place somewhere else. So they're just not willing. Most men I know just aren't willing to put themselves through that ridicule.
But do you think society treat male being victim of domestic violence as a joke, Alan?
Yeah, I do, because men are supposed to be masculine and strong, and you're supposed to protect, right, and defend yourself. We're the protectors, protect the women, from hurt, harm, and danger. So I really do believe that it's looked down upon and laughed at. And I feel like if they want progress with the society and the generation we live in today, the help should be very private. It should be very private and not open, and like he said, like a big ass sign. Oh, I said big ass.
I'll probably say that too.
Like this gigantic sign saying,
Yeah.
we about to abuse men right here. Like we gonna come, turn it up, but nah. But
So, do you also think that police take it seriously when they're called on the scene? Mm-hmm. You think they would take it seriously since it's a man doing that?
Let me answer that.
Oh, Lord.
Okay, I do know police take this seriously. Like, I don't know how many states it is, but like I said, it's whoever gets to the phone first. So if there's a man calling and it's clear, like, that, hey, this woman's been throwing stuff, been, hitting him. He's been, like, police take it seriously. Like, they don't have, like, I've never experienced a issue where the police come up there acting unprofessionally and say, nah, I couldn't be. They, they take, the woman's statement, they take the man's statement, they separate them, and, they take the evidence and they make their decision. So I've never had a problem with police not taking that seriously. That's something they're supposed to take seriously, because whoever the accused is supposed to leave the house that night. So whether, the two people, end up making up and getting back together the next day, that's irrelevant. Whether they change their mind that night, it's irrelevant. Once the police have been called for a domestic violence issue, their job is to see who's actually hurt, if they need medical attention, and whoever, one person has to leave. Usually, you want the abuser needs to leave. Sometimes they decide whether they need to go to jail or not, depending on the injuries. But definitely one person always has to leave. So,
me personally, I believe that it depends on the area, because, I've seen a lot of abuse. So I know from living in Florida, the cops, when a woman hits a man like it's nothing, they call the police, they're not going to do anything. They just won't. Now, when I came to Georgia and the woman called and the dude called saying, this girl hitting on me, they take it really serious. They're like, it's equal. Like, don't hit him, you don't hit her, like that.
Jody.
So I worked at Chick-fil-A for a long time, and as most people know, Chick-fil-A cops, if you work in the area, you eat for free, so they're always in there, and they're always talking to us or whatnot. And we were talking about domestic violence, and they were saying, they do respond, to heterosexual domestic violence, whether it's man hitting a woman, woman hitting a man, and they take it and they approach it one way versus it's two men. In a relationship, and not that they say they take it less seriously, but the way they approach it is a little bit more equal. Naturally, when you go into a room and you see a woman bleeding, you see a man bleeding, you run to the woman first. That's just how we are. The woman needs the love, she needs the nurturing. But when you see two men bleeding, you're more willing to think with your mind, what happened here? You're not so willing to be so nurturing. And I feel like that's how it often is in homosexual relationships that are dealing with domestic violence. They treat it more as, I guess, more like a crime scene, more like these two men were fighting. Instead of a domestic violence, somebody's emotionally hurt. They just see it more as a physical brim of violence. And I think that's the approach of it isn't as nurturing, and the approach of it isn't as emotional as it needs to be, as if a woman was getting abused, because they take more time. They take the woman where she needs to go. They make sure the man leaves the house in its entirety. And I don't feel like homosexual couples that are in that situation get the exact same fair treatment in all areas.
Hey, if you are a man that is getting abused, or you're just in a very messed up relationship where you find yourselves arguing and putting your hands on each other, women don't put your hands on men, and they won't feel the need to put their hands on you. Men, you got a mother. If you wouldn't want it done to your mother or your sister or your aunt or your grandma, whether you've seen it growing up or not, you shouldn't do it. You're a man. You're at least 2-3 times as strong as a woman, unless she lips or something like that. Then you just need to leave the house. Honestly, like that's the easiest thing I can say. If she takes your keys, you need to walk. Just walk somewhere, call a friend. If she takes your phone, walk to your friend's house or run, depending on what you need to do. But everybody always has a choice, and that's the problem. People make bad choices thinking everything's going to be all right, and then they're in a messed up position. So men, just leave the house. It's that easy. It's not cool, and please stop bragging about it on social media and stop putting up videos, because that's really annoying. That's what I got to say.
Well, as you can see, domestic violence is not a gender issue. And thank you guys for coming and sharing your perspective on men being abused. My name is Claudette McKenzie. See you guys next week on 9 Seconds.